welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to reprofile a rip cut saw into a crosscut saw. I'm planning to do it on this gent saw here, which requires a little more care than some of the others. So what I'm going to be doing is showing you on a larger saw exactly what we're doing first before we go ahead and sharpen this. But before we get into that, we need to look at a couple of terms that relate to this. So let's jump over to the whiteboard and I'll explain. So the two terms we want to look at in relation to sharpening a handsaw or reprofiling, specifically when you're reprofiling, is we want to look at rake and fleam. So rake is the angle on the front of the cutting tooth. Fleam is the angle across the cutting tooth. So let's have a look at rake first. So since we're starting with a rip cut saw, if we run down here and we've got our rip cut saw at its most aggressive, perpendicular, right up 90 degrees to the saw plate, this is what's known as 0 degrees rake. So if we go forward of that, it's technically positive rake, which we don't really want. Positive rake means the angle is forward and it's going to be more aggressive than it's upright. It's just not going to cut right. And negative rake is where the tooth is set back slightly. So in a rip cut saw, a lot of people will do a negative 10 to 15 rake and they actually just set it back a little bit so it's less aggressive. People will do that on the first teeth that you start with on a saw to make it start faster or easier, and so it cuts a little bit easier through the cut but less aggressive. It's often set back into a negative rake. Now when we look at rake, essentially you've got a positive 30 and a negative 30 from our 0. Reason being is if we look at the rip cut here, which is set like this, we have an equilateral triangle, and so each corner is 60 degrees. So if you split that down the middle of the line here, you end up with obviously a 0 rake here, and then you've got your 30, negative 30, positive 30 either side of that. So if the rip cut saw is at 0 degrees, which is what you're going to buy most of them at, and we go to convert it to a crosscut, we can see that we want our file when we do this to sit flat on top. Reason being, a crosscut is a series of knife cuts. Now you cannot make that more aggressive by altering the rake, so we just leave it at 0. So we have our equilateral triangles right the way along. So that is the rake. So if we move on to the fleam is the angle across the tooth. So we can see here we've got a bevel on both sides of that tooth, and then we've got this one here where we can't see our bevels. Those same bevels are on the other side of that. And so as you can see, we alternate all the way across the saw. Now we obviously have to put set on that, and so the set is always coming from this bevel side and pushing it out. So with the set on them, you end up from the top having it look like that. But it's important with the set, and I'm probably not going to need to reset this saw, but it's just something to mention. If you set it, you have to make sure you're setting it and pushing it away so the non-bevel side is on the outside, so you've got this point leading here. Now there are varying fleam angles that you can put across it. 60 degrees is actually a very common angle across your tooth, and when we sharpen a crosscut saw, because the file comes from both sides, so you have to file one tooth from one side and then you need to file from the other side. Now when we file, say from this side, and we've got our bevel here, we sharpen this bevel here and we sharpen the bevel on the back of this. And that's why you need to do your angle one way and then you need to do your angle coming from the other side, and that's how we get our full sharpening done with our fleam. So with those terms mentioned, maybe not fully understood, don't really need to fully understand the terms, just that we need to have our file flat when we're converting it from a rip cut to a crosscut, and to get our angle roughly. I mean, you say 60 degrees on the angle for the bevel, to be honest, the angle doesn't really matter. Whatever angle you do right the way across is not really going to affect it, because most of your cutting is done right up on the point here, and In all honesty, a lot of people like to tell you that the angle of the fleam matters, but to be honest, as long as you've got a bevel there and it's sharpened to a sharp point up here, it doesn't really matter. So with these terms sort of understood, let's head over. So I think what we'll do is I'm not going to sharpen this small one because it's going to be too difficult for you to actually see what I'm doing with this, and with these very thin plates it's quite temperamental. So I think what I'm going to do is just show you on this saw because it's going to be the easiest to see with the nice big teeth, and everything that you see and learn from this you can then take to something like this, where ideally you want to use a slightly smaller file than this. The idea is you want a file that's just over double the height of your tooth that you're sharpening, so when you turn these around you don't wear out one corner more than the others, so it allows you to get a lot more use out of your file. I want to start on the heel here, because if you do stuff anything up you can correct it before you get down into the usable part, because you can see where the handle comes in here. This little bit here, you're not really doing any sawing in this bit here, so it's a good spot to start. So we should be able to see here clearly that this is a rip cut. You can see they're a little bit off 90 degrees on this saw. This is a saw that I haven't used, I just gave it a clean up. I haven't actually sharpened it. You can see there's actually a flat back here, which is common because you can't really sharpen this tooth, so a flat right on this very last tooth here is actually very common. We can see here, and I don't know if you can see that if we're deadbolt upright, so 90 degrees to the saw plate, our file would sit like this, so we can see it sits back slightly when you actually place it into the tooth. So we're actually sharpening this front edge on this side all the way along, because that is the front edge, because this is the back. So the first thing I like to do when we convert it to a crosscut, especially when you want it like this, is to actually, you want to file through a few times before you add any thing to the tooth. Now, I've just hit that tooth 11 times. This is not getting high enough. So you can see that we're actually changing the shape of this first. And we can see in doing this that this is really high, so we are actually going to have to file that down. But there is another way to do this, which is why I wanted to show you on this first, is you can do it that way, or you can keep it on this angle and just angle it. The problem is, I think the teeth are too far forward when you do that. So you want to go through and do the same amount of passes with the same amount of pressure. So we're only filing forward like this, and we're putting no downward pressure on it. And trying to do the same amount of length passes. So we can see that these teeth here are now in the right configuration we want. They're in the right shape. So I'm going to reshape every tooth first. Now, to deal with this one here before we move on, is we grab a flat file, which I have over here. Just a flat mill file. So I've just done another 5 on that, so I need to go back and do 5 more on these. Now the reason I went back and added those extra ones to the other teeth is you want to have the same filing amount on every tooth. That means that every tooth is going to be roughly the same profile, roughly the same height. There's going to be a little variance. Don't worry too much about the variance. It doesn't matter too much. As long as roughly your teeth at this point are all the same profile and roughly the same height, that's all we're going to worry about. Now, if you had a whole bunch in and out a lot, you could do what's called jointing, and that's getting a flat file, and you file a flat across all the teeth, and then you come back and refile them, and that's how you can get them all at the same height if you have an issue. In this case, this saw was already jointed roughly at the right height for me, and so unless there's any big variances and issues that I get with the teeth while I'm filing them myself, I don't really need to joint it. Some people say you need to joint the saw every single time you sharpen. There's not much point in that. It's only after excessive wear and tear. Like with most of my saws, I've not actually had to joint them at all, and I've sharpened a bunch of these like 10, 15 times and never had to joint them. It's only if they go out of relative flatness. They don't all have to be 100%. So I'm sitting it flat, and I'm actually not in that gully. So because I want to keep that centered, you can see that I'm sitting it here, and I'm actually resting on the angles. It's a little bit strange of a feeling, but as long as you get it flat, because you'll see it's out of tip there, so you just wanted to get it sitting in there, and you're just looking for that to stay flat. That is where the most important part is, that this stays flat. So you can see when you do it in slow-mo there, that's what you end up with. I just did one more there. So if you do need to do one more like I did, go back and add it to everything. You then want to look at where the set is, because as I said with the saw is that you need to point away. So both bevels are on the one that's pointed away. So because we file on one side of the tooth and then the other, we have to file from both sides as we come through. So what we want to do here is look for the tooth that's facing away from us, and that's where we want to start. And we will start by working like this, and then the other one will come the other way. So in this case, if I look at these teeth, I'm looking for the set. So this very first tooth here is facing towards me. This tooth here is facing towards you. So I'm going to start by coming in on this angle. So I'm hitting the bevel on this side, or the bevel on my side on this back stop where we don't saw, and then the bevel on one side of this tooth. So then we skip this gully, come to this gully, skip this gully, come to this gully, skip this gully, come to this gully. So you can see what I've got here is just a stick of timber. I've got a kerf cut down the middle, and then I've just got a couple of wooden clamps here actually holding this. It sits it up higher. Now obviously this is not long enough to come right down to here. So ideally I should have a longer piece that's actually cut out, so you actually sort of hand plane an angle on it so it slides right up to this end. Now I haven't done that, so I'm actually just going to be careful and work on this here. But I've got my angles set in here, so that's about 60 degrees here, and I've done those same lines on this in triangles, so I can sort of line it up like that. Work it here. So that was 5, and that looks like it's giving me a pretty good angle. So I'm going to skip this one, go to the next one, skip one, skip one, It's important that you have something to mark this if you have to stop like I'm about to, because I want to bring the camera in closer for you. Get a little bit of mark on the top. Trust me, you don't want to put it on the side, because if you move this around and you have to readjust your clamping, you might lose your position. So just be careful about that. So you can see I'm doing 5 streaks on every one, and because of my permanent marker I can come back in here and just go back to my marking of about 60 degrees. Now I'm going to put on some hearing protection because this is very noisy. So now we're going all one way. There are 2 ways that you can proceed from here. You can turn the saw around, keep running on your same side and do it the same. Or the reason I set it up like this is I like to actually reach across my saw and come in this direction. So I would come in like this all the way along. Now, it is really up to you. My personal preference is to not move it because I just find it's a little bit easier. So there you have it, folks. That's the process I use to reprofile a rip cut saw to a cross cut saw. And I know at the start I said I was going to show it on my gent saw, but I decided to do it on the panel saw because I realized that my gent saw was just too small to do it. And to be honest, you have more benefit of a cross cut tooth when you've got much bigger teeth and less teeth than when you've got these 12, 15, 16 or even up to 20 teeth per inch. When you've got the little rip cut teeth, I find there is very little difference between the cross cut and rip cut. But in something this size, there is definitely a benefit to having the cross cut versus the rip cut some of the time. It's not always very noticeable, the difference between the two. So if you'd like to see a video where I go through a couple of different saws with different saw teeth types and compare the cuts so you can see the difference, let me know down below. And also don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there, and sound off in the comments if there's any questions you've got or anything else. Do just leave it down below and I will try to get back to you. And if you'd like to see another great video such as the one you've seen here today, do check out the videos on screen now. Bye for now.